to
So your
discuss it.
research design, I'm pretty familiar with research, so.
Yeah.
So what I'm understanding is, because I think this is a very important study. All right, so what I'm understanding is you're gonna do all your basic research on all the kinds of things I've mentioned. And then you're gonna come up with, given that the research design is, however you're gonna do it.
Yes.
It can be research of first impression, it can be anecdotal, it can be statistical, I'm
Yeah.
pretty familiar with that stuff
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
And then what I'm understanding, and here's what's missing for me. We absolutely should do this. But this, I don't think would pass muster if it were doing a doctoral thing, and although I know what you're doing. So I think it's great you're doing it. I would like you to zero in relative to gender,
Okay.
race, because equity's a big
Yes.
thing, right? Okay.
So let me,
Zip code, I love that.
let me ask you, would it be helpful if we brought that research design in so that you can see it as part of this?
I have no problem approving it now with the caveat that we see the research design, we see the targeted areas, we see the basis for why you're doing it, because I think it's so important, we need to take the good from what we've already done, and we need to add to it what's not there, what hasn't been looked at, so that the whole community is looked at. And right now, the biggies are healthcare. Healthcare is a biggie. Gender equity is a biggie. And there are others. Food, maybe, maybe not. I'm not saying no. I'm saying
Right.
Council needs to know all this, so it's instructive, as my colleague said, so that when we're making decisions, it's instructive or a base or part of how we make the decisions.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so that is the caveat I would put on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I am, as we merge effectively toward that one Chattanooga, and as the mayor wants to narrow the gap between the incomes of blacks and whites in the city, I raise this question to all. What is it that most successful cities in the South that we lack? As far as educational, I think we hit on it last time we talked. And what that is a historical black school. And I hope that we can include in that study how we can bring a satellite HBCU to the city of Chattanooga. I think that would definitely help us to bridge that gap, the income gap, to.
Amen.
All right, any, Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Malden,
Yes, sir.
I would love to see in this report an identification of policy deficiency, policy recommendation, and possible action items this council could walk away from. I want something I could put in a toolbox and start thinking about.
100%.
If that helps. I mean, I have sat through, this is my second term, and I've been through study after study after study, and Dr. Burrs is right. The mayor's women council is fantastic. It has done such phenomenal work, and I think we all kind of, and I said this before from the bias, I think we know a lot. I want to know how to make it better.
So to your point.
Does that help?
Yes, I
Okay.
added under scope of work, thinking back to our
Yeah.
conversation last time, on the third bullet point, to develop those policy recommendations and implementation strategies so that we can
Yeah.
develop that toolbox.
I mean, that's what I'm really hoping to get out of this is, all right, I'm gonna walk away with a hammer and some nails and let's get to work.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you, sir. That's all I have. Madam Chair, thank you.
thank you.
All right, Councilman Hill.
It's exciting to see us narrowing in on exactly what we need. I agree 100% with what Councilman Ledford said about here's the hit list of here's where we need to focus our efforts as it relates to working on disparity and improving equity in our city according to the elements that we decide to work on, whether it's gender, race, income, ethnicity. But also something that came up in our conversations a few weeks ago that really excited me was the concept of a framework for future decision-making. Because to have a list of here's the priority fruit, the low-hanging fruit that we know we need to work on, and here are the legislative components of that work, that's terrific. But this body has innumerable decisions to make week to week to week. And if we, as part of this work, with you developed a framework for how we evaluate all of the things that come across our desks, whether it be stormwater or animal control board, I mean, any number of things that, that we could use that framework in the same way that we employ the but-for standard when we're looking at economic incentives. That would be so useful, and I think would be, potentially, if it works well, a legacy for future councils.
Okay, sounds good.
That's it, Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other comments or questions for Dr. Malden? All right, and Councilman Ledford, you said three things, and I only got two of them. Policy deficiency, policy recommendations, and there was a middle one.
That was providing action items
Action items. Okay.
or possible action items.
Which I thought was great. I think that's important to go in with our framework and,
Thank you.
so, Dr. Malden, did you get all of the things?
I have all of them.
Okay. If not, it'll be available on YouTube later.
Yeah.
So with that, since there are no other questions, like I said, we do have it in the budget. We received the request and additional scope of work from Councilman Burrs, as well as Madam Vice Chair Hill and Councilman Ledford and Councilman Hester in regards to the research for the HBCU. So with that in mind, we do need to vote on this. Again, we do have this within our budget. The current, the estimated cost is $19,809, and that information is here in your packet. So are you ready to vote on this, or do you need additional information?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve it with the caveat that we get within a week, 2 weeks, including, right now, we're kind of approving a blank slate, and my colleagues had some great ideas, so I really would like to see a detailed, and I guess where I'm a little loose is I think it's more than race.
Yeah.
It's gender, it's age. Age is a big one. If you read the Council on Women's Studies, it's a big one. Age, and with people of color, it's even worse in some areas. But healthcare, gender, age, relative to, matrixed with whatever the issues are. I mean, if it's food desert, housing, I mean, that I don't know, but I really would like to see it fleshed out.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, then I go ahead and make the motion.
All right, then.
Second.
All right, the motion properly second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Dr. Malden. So we'll give it maybe 2 weeks for the research
Yeah.
design. So if you could just send us that in.
Yeah, circulate it to us ahead of time so that we can think about it and refine as each one of us had in mind.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Malden.
All right.
All right, the next piece we wanted to discuss briefly is the Human Resource Committee. Like I said, Councilwoman Coolride had an emergency, so she had to step out. But you all should have got an email with her legislative goals, so I wanted to review those quickly. And then, if all is well, she wanted to share that as well, so I wanted to see if you all had any comments or questions. So her 3 goals were workforce development, as far as legislative goals, workforce development, enhanced workforce development and training programs to ensure employees have the skills and knowledge needed for their roles, employment engagement, implement strategies to boost employee morale, satisfaction, and engagement, increase in productivity and retention, and then performance management, develop effective performance evaluation processes to assess and improve employee performance. So with those, so those are her 3. Are there any additional recommended legislative goals for this Human Resource Committee? All right, I don't see. Yes.
Well, no, I just had a question. Councilwoman Coonrod was offering to chair this committee where we
Yes.
form it. And she's doing economic development and equity
Yes,
and then human resources. That's a big lift.
that is a big lift. So, any other comments or questions about the committee?
Okay, so let me get some clarity. I'm sorry, I was running late, so please forgive me for that. So is this in reference to the employment guide book that we're, the changes that were made on that?
No, it is
Okay.
not. This is a separate, just like all the other committees, it's just
Okay.
a standing committee.
Okay, so no, my question is in reference to that. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Noel. Any other questions or anything? So with that, we will go ahead and create this committee. Councilwoman Coonrod would like to chair this one. Any opposition to that? Any questions? So I guess Mandy, she will be in touch with you. All right, thank you. Very quick enough. And then now we have what we've all been waiting for, our AHO discussion.
Boy, I've been waiting for it too.
Yeah, come on in, Chris.
Let's see if we can get this up on the screen, Madam Chair. Got 45 minutes worth of slides.
No, you do.
For you, I'll keep it to 5.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got it.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotta stop.
Neil.
Made it up.
Y'all, I appreciate this body so much. Just great.
I love my council family.
They've been on the whole time.
So we have not been streaming? We have not been streaming?
Yes,
Yeah.
streaming, but they can't get
I like looking at myself. Thank you.
Do I screen mirror it? Is that how Thank you very much. There we go. Yeah, I'm gonna stay here for a second. Thank you, Ellis. All right, so today, thank you, council, for giving us this time and inviting me here today for this. Is inviting the right word? So, we're here today to talk about the administrative hearing officer and how we have progressed since Mr. Mike Mallon was appointed earlier this year in June. We have understandably had a lot to do with setting up something from scratch that has never existed in the city of Chattanooga before. So on June 6th, Mike was appointed the AHO. You know that, and you did so unanimously. Great choice. Administrative Hearing Officer Mallon met with myself, several members of our LDO, inspector staff, as well as Dallas Rucker in June and July. He also, his first meeting actually was with Jim Exum, who is going to talk to you in just a minute. Jim is the Administrative Hearing Officer for our larger peer cities in Chattanooga, Red Bank, Soddy Daisy, or in Hamilton County, Red Bank, Soddy Daisy, and Collegedale, where he's been doing this work for a while. So he's very experienced in how this procedure should happen and following the state guidelines on it as well. In August, we learned that Mike is unable to serve full-time in the role and fulfill all of the obligations due to some family health obligations that he believes will be temporary for no more than several months. And we encourage you to keep him on as one of the administrative hearing officers. You are entitled to have 2. And we're going to recommend Jim Exum for the other, so that we have the flexibility to. Also, in dealing with something like this, both Jim and Mike will unquestionably have a conflict of interest at some point because they had represented somebody who's come before them as an AHO or something. So the flexibility of having 2 is really valuable here if one of them has to recuse themselves on a specific case. So as soon as we were notified of, and I think all of you were notified as well, of Mike's temporary situation, I reached out to Jim Exum at Mike's suggestion. That was his suggestion for the other AHO, and what a great suggestion. And then Jim and I started meeting with our staff again to finish up some of the things that Mike and Jim had already been working on and that Mike had started. Just yesterday, we met virtually, myself, Tremaine Freeman, Mike and Jim met yesterday afternoon to go over some of the ordinances that they will be enforcing, just to kind of tighten up the language. And we talked about the STVR ordinance, but also trying to fulfill the wishes of the council. We talked about noise, and we also talked about litter, so we can be prepared for those cases immediately after we wade through the backlog of STVR cases. I'm going to tell you the number in just a minute. So that's where we've been. That's what's happened. And I can go into detail about creating the forms from scratch and determining the state-governed reporting timeline and notification timeline. I'll take questions at the end, or during if you want to shout them. So next Tuesday is the big day. That's when the first 30 NOVs, notices of violation, are going out to owners and operators of unlicensed STVRs. We then have to wait 14 days and then transmit those to the office of the AHO, which is going to be Jim and his staff at the Chambliss firm. And then he has a 30-day notice requirement that he then sends out from the office of the AHO, and they have to be given at least 30 days before the hearing. I would like to take this opportunity to apologize to you because I did not know about the 30-day rule, and that is why we have brilliant attorneys who work here who keep me from making those mistakes most of the time. But the 30-day rule does put it off just a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question, you said that they'll be sent to the office of the AHO, which is going to be Jim and his staff at Chambliss. What happened to our staff at the city court? Why are they not the office of the AHO and staff?
Very good question. We have encountered some complications with using city court, and in keeping with the wishes of the council to do this as quickly as possible, we are going to begin the AHO proceedings in 1A at the Development Resource Center. And there are some legal issues with it, and I would defer to Phil for any further answers on that.
We have been, I guess, requested to look at the aspect of whether there is still a second division part of city court. We have been requested to look at the provisions. I was looking at the last charter amendment that we had here in Chattanooga regarding whether there is still a second division of city court. And I don't believe there is currently. There was a provision that was placed in the ordinance that was adopted in 2021 that did actually say that, one section here, the city council reserves the right to reestablish Division 2 should another city court division become necessary. I guess the question that y'all have in that regard, the closeness to a city court location, is that something that the folks here in Tennessee would assert is a judicial action, or is it an administrative action? And we have to be careful on I guess the aspects of separation of powers in that regard. We did reserve that right. The council did reserve that right in, I believe it's ordinance number 13719 that was passed in October of 2021. So y'all haven't looked at that in a couple of years here in that regard, but that's something we probably need to at least look at.
So,
And yes,
well, so we set a concept of a budget. We have a budget for the AHO office. And that was based on the idea that we were paying hourly for an AHO, not for AHO support staff at a private law firm.
Yes, ma'am.
When we have full-time court staff employed by the city of Chattanooga that, to our knowledge as a council, do not have not reached their full capacity for work volume. So do we have a hard stop deadline on when we're moving this clerical work, if not the physical location for separation of jurisdictions or whatever? I don't fully follow what you're saying. Do we have a hard date for when we say, all right, Chambliss paralegals are no longer taking this on, this is in the city staff?
We do not, because the lingering questions have not yet been answered. I'm pushing for that, but no, ma'am, we do not have a hard stop date because we don't know what the answer to that question is.
you do have the ability of the city attorney to say that just we are paying enough for legal support at at some point pursuant to the charter, or at least references as to legal expenses are under our jurisdiction, at least under the charter.
What?
Well, we got Councilwoman Burrs. I'm sorry, Madam Vice Chair.
I'm listening, so.
Okay, all right, Councilwoman Burrs.
So we appointed, let me make sure I'm correct about this.
Sure.
I believe the law says that the administrative hearing officer is answerable to the council because we passed the ordinance, we appointed that person. Making it happen administratively is up to the mayor's office, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what I'm not clear about is irrespective of the person, somebody was appointed June 6th. They never were put on the payroll, never given contact information, none of that ever happened, okay? And there was work done, that's number one. Number two, we have at the county courthouse 2 courtrooms. They are not owned by any of our employees. They are owned by us. So why would anyone have the right to say yay or nay to our use of our courtroom? I'm asking legally.
Oh,
Let me ask legally, because
My first
it's not a
question is,
personal
I don't know that we have
thing.
2 courtrooms. We got 1 courtroom.
All right. We have, so over there, we have, so Division 1 and Division 2 use the same courtroom, and we were paying each judge to work half-day.
We were paying.
I mean, is that, all right, because that's been an ongoing thing. All right.
Yes.
So it's a room. It's a room. So why can that not continue? By the way, the staff there was working for 2 judges. Now they're working for 1. How can it be any kind of a challenge? Salaries weren't cut. How can it be any kind of a challenge to go back to what they were doing before? One is an elected judge
Yes.
that goes by, Sessions Court criteria. But the other is our administrative hearing officer. I'm
Right.
not understanding, why there's any commentary about that.
Well, the general sessions judge authority is no longer in the city court.
I know
in
that,
Chattanooga.
but-
So, they have the authority to appoint or employ 1 court officer subject to confirmation by the city council. At least that's what's, at least currently in the code under section 1219 of the
Okay,
code.
they can impose, and
Court
I,
officer.
obviously, they can approve them getting cars, I'm not talking about that division.
Sure.
I'm talking about the administrative hearing officer.
Well, the administrative hearing officer is not a judge. So
Got it.
once
Are you
again,
saying they can't use the same room?
I'm saying that the judge has control over that room at certain times, obviously when the court is in session. When court is not in session, I guess it is an issue of the use of that room, and some arrangement would have to be resolved if you want to use that room, yes.
So because of that, and I'm following up on Councilwoman's, this is like up the down staircase. I'm thinking, if City Hall, we're paying for those courtrooms over there at the courthouse, right?
We're paying for the clerk's office, as I understand it, in 1 courtroom right now.
Right.
Yes.
And that belongs to us, right?
It
And a
belongs to the city
judicial
of
office.
Huh?
And a one judicial
Yeah, and a
office.
judicial office.
Yes, it's part of the lease.
So why don't we have say-so? We, over here, have say-so over what goes on over there.
But you clearly have say-so over the budget of what goes on over there, no question.
Well, that's been a discussion every year, hasn't it? All right,
I mean, they might need half as many people if they've got half as much work.
Yes.
all I'm trying to say is, this is ridiculous. We call the shots. We own the offices. I'm not understanding, really, it's probably my ignorance, but what am I missing here?
Well, you do have a citywide elected judge who is elected to that position over there. And so that person has control over the courtroom while the court is in session, no question, on there. Otherwise, you would be
Right, and it's
exercising
going about
authority that
half
you
a
don't
day
have
now.
over the judicial branch.
Not a problem.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we were to
You need a
say,
schedule, I guess.
well, we,
That is difficult.
well, so every Thursday from 2 to 5, I mean, this is not difficult. What I'm feeling bad about is the fact that, I'm not making short shrift of this, but council did pass something June 6th. And somehow we're letting bureaucracy dictate the implementation of something we passed. And what I really feel bad about, and it doesn't matter who the person is, we passed something. There should have been arrangements made for them to have a phone, whatever you get when you work as an AHO.
Sure.
An email maybe, and certainly when they're working on an hourly basis, paying them?
I can speak to that. I asked Mike yesterday about his hours, if he was ready to submit them. He said, no, I'm still keeping track of them, and that he didn't want to submit them yet. I did offer that to him. I've
What
done
he
it 3
shouldn't have
times.
had, June 7th, he should have started work and submitting hours. We never set up the paraphernalia to do it. That's all I'm saying. And I'm trying to figure out who's calling the shots. And I believe in this case it should be us, because we passed the ordinance. We did everything, and
Maybe an invite to Judge Patey to come see you.
Judge Patey's a terrific, please, we're not gonna turn this into, David, we're not turning this into a Judge Patey is a friend, she's a terrific person, and this has nothing to do with Judge Patey. Okay, this in no way is a criticism of her. I'm talking process.
I'm
Very
just
clear,
trying to figure out
process.
If these are issues as to
It would
timing,
about clerical process.
if these are issues as to timing, then maybe a discussion back and forth would be a good thing in that regard.
So let's do, real quick, so let me, Jermaine, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna try to help out the attorney here, just, and Phil, please feel free to tell me to shut up.
I will.
I think there is also some confusion, I think, about whether or not AHO proceedings can happen in the city court, and whether or not there is whether or not if those proceedings are happening within the city court, is there a distinction, therefore, between the AHO proceedings happening in, say, a Division II, if a Division II was created, and then does that somehow impact the ability of the AHO officer to set fines above what is traditionally allowed by the city court? Phil, correct me if I'm wrong with any of that.
Yeah, the Municipal Technical Advisory Service is trying to at least understand the differences between administrative hearing officers and judicial officers, even though there is a statute that is clearly in the Tennessee Code that sets up those requirements here, which is at Tennessee Code 654-101 and a whole chapter that our ordinance is patterned after. So our ordinance has been in effect at least since we at least created those, the office of an administrative hearing officer, and up to 2 positions, which is within our city code currently here at this point in time. And the Municipal Technical Advisory Service has I guess a branch that deals with city court questions. And city courts are dramatically different in the 97 counties that we have in the state. Some city courts are simply a branch that is set up to be a version of General Sessions Court, and ours is not. and has not been so since our charter amendments have occurred here in Chattanooga. So they are having to deal with that issue as to what is a general rule versus what may be a separate rule based upon your own powers under your charter to amend your charter. So the simple answer is it is confusing. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we have Councilman Ledford, then I'll come back to Madam Vice Chair Hill. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the points. I understand we have hit a snag and an issue with our AHO, Mr. Mallon. So I look at that as, okay, let's problem solve. And I do know that in June, this council wanted an AHO in place. I think that we promised that to our constituents. I think we have a backlog. If it means doing something right now, I'm looking for a fast track to get this AHO on the job. And if we need to massage something or work it out down the road, I'm willing to look at that. I'm willing to do the work on that. But I think it's been long enough. I think we need an AHO. I think we want one. And I know that Attorney Exum is very qualified to do this. He has the mechanics in place. I don't know if he's considered the Chick-fil-A of AHOs, but we need to get this going. It's been long enough. And I think I've heard that more than once in meetings. If we need to work some details out later on where we need or where we shift our clerical responsibilities, I'm willing to do the work on that. I want to get the HO in place. And I think people who elected us to do that want to see that happen as well, because the casework's piling up. Those are just my 2 cents.
Councilman Ledford, agreed, 100%. Madam Vice Chair.
So, well put. A point of clarity. When we talk about the AHO and whether or not it can be in city court, are we speaking literally as in the room, or are we speaking figuratively as in processed by the same people who work behind the scenes in city court?
I think you've got a difference in the way that the Chattanooga charter is set up in that regard, because the person that is the court officer here, the city court clerk, is not an employee of the judge. Under our
Okay.
charter, that is separated out, and that is under the finance office. But there has to be a separation within the finance office as to how administrative fees would be handled or fees would be handled by the court system.
Okay, so if I'm Jenny and I work currently in the city court office,
Yes.
can I legally work on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, city court, and Tuesday, Thursday, processing administrative hearing officer?
If your finance director person gave you that as your scope of work. and I
So
don't
that
know
is
what
not
that is.
illegal, okay, is what you're telling me. That is
Yes.
not where this crossover is. This is like it's a physical building question. So we have the RPA, you said, a room in the RPA.
The DRC.
DRC, excuse me. But to Darren's point, if we're fast tracking to implement this plan, thank you, Chris, for finding a workaround. I would like to see us move away from paying for private law firm support staff as quickly as possible.
Sure.
And if that comes out of finance and people's job descriptions need to get reworked, that's some of the urgency that I think we need, because we did not do this to create a budgetary black hole, but a cause and effect, and causing people to that are in place to make Chattanooga a good place to live. So, thank you for the clarity.
So with that, Chris, as we move forward with this, because I'm in agreement, I mean, I have some of my wonderful constituents here today. We're ready for this AHO, we've been ready for it. So as you move forward with this, in the next, let's say 90 days, can we set it up and go ahead and get the court schedule to see could you get us a schedule and say, okay, these are the dates and times that we can have it at the court, like Thursday from 2 to 5 or Wednesday from whatever time to whatever time? And maybe some additional, maybe I do some follow-up questions, so some additional information, because we do, like I said, we don't wanna create a budgetary black hole where we're paying these additional hours when we don't necessarily, when we already have staff that can do it. So maybe in the next 90 days, we can work toward moving from private practice to, in-house staff. So we can do that, and we're here to support whatever we need to support to make sure that that gets done.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we certainly are working toward that, and we'll work toward that, and I appreciate the council's feedback
I
today.
have one more
The dockets for city court are available on the city court website
So,
that shows the counts as
What's
well.
to keep the AHO from starting tomorrow? I don't wanna wait 3 months, and sometimes we garble
Oh, not
Well, we're not waiting 3
No,
months.
we're not waiting 3 months, no.
What is to keep let me make it easy, what's to keep the AHO from starting a week from today?
I'd like to, if I could wait just a moment and finish this, and then Jim Exum is going to address that, giving the state guidelines for notice to violators.
Oh, I'm not talking about noticing stuff, I'm talking about there's somebody in an office working so that when the legal times run, they're ready to go.
So this is related to that, Councilwoman, and doesn't impact that. I don't want anyone to leave here today with the impression that our staff has not been working on this. We have very tireless, dedicated people in the Land Development Office who have been creating a process from scratch, and they are working every day on this. You may not see evidence of it yet because the project is not completed yet, but I promise you they're working. It is a priority in the Land Development Office. So I will answer the second part of that
Yeah.
question in just a moment, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
So we have worked through a lot of we're creating forms out of nothing, and we have to make sure that they're legally compliant with what the state says they have to be. We have to be very careful with the language. We've also set up a method for fines to be remitted to the city through the Land Development Office. We have a way to do that there. We can shift that to city court, and Phil is working on that, but we have a way to do it in the short term because I know that there's a backlog and you wanted to get this started. So just yesterday, Jermaine, Mike, and Jim and myself met about the 3 issues I talked about, the STVR bill, the noise, the litter. Still, we'll probably have some recommendations within a few weeks on STVR, maybe a couple of months on the other 2, for ways to tighten those up and make them more enforceable and easier to understand for the public as well. So here's what's coming. This speaks to the future timeline. The first 30 notices of violation, and this is a timeline that we did work out with Jim. Next Tuesday, a week from today, the first 30 go out, and that will be the first week of hearings. Right now, we're planning on doing 1 hearing per week, a full afternoon, once a week. It's right now on Wednesdays, and the first will be Wednesday, November 15th in the DRC 1A. The NOVs get sent to Jim and his staff, and then he immediately within a few days, notifies the owners, and then those owners have to have a 30-day window before we can actually set them for hearing. So that's why we cannot have hearings sooner than that.
Madam Chair. So, Chris, did you say 1 hearing per week?
One docket, the 30 hearings per week, but one afternoon
Okay, I
per
was
week.
gonna say, oh, no,
We-
you done made that up.
3 council terms from now, we'd be done with it.
Made it up.
So I ran the numbers again this morning. We're at 268 unpermitted STVRs as of today. If we take 30 a week, allowing for the Thanksgiving schedule as well as the Christmas schedule, that gets us to the last week of January to get through those 268. I do feel strongly and believe council agrees that we should work through the STVR backlog before tackling noise and litter, especially since we need to tighten those ordinances up a little bit for enforceability. So in the meantime, both AHOs, Jim and Mike, are both working, and they will be reviewing the ordinances for STVRs with me, the noise and litter on an ongoing basis. Like I said, we'll have recommendations soon. And Phil has prepared a resolution that I believe will be on the council agenda either next week or the week after, appointing Jim to that second AHO spot. Right now, the work we have done with him is under the legal services contract that you've already approved with Chambliss, so we're covered. But before the first hearing takes place, Phil believes he would need to be appointed.
As you have 2 positions available, and that's the way it works in the ordinance currently.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair.
So in addition to unpermitted STVRs, I know I've received CCs on 311 complaints about current STVRs, some that may be permitted, some that might not be permitted. So what I'm hearing is that unpermitted at this point is taking precedent over complaints about violations of other STVR issues?
I'm unaware of a flood of, or many complaints. We had 10 last year for the full year. If there's been an uptick in complaints about permitted STVRs, I'm unaware of that, but I can look into that for you this week.
Okay, yeah, I mean, as complaints come in about, there's one right here, I mean, and I don't know if they're permitted or not, I just know that there's, in my district, I know right where one is, that people have submitted multiple times and they'll say, haven't heard anything back about when is this gonna be fixed, and I'll tell them about HO.
After this meeting, I can look at the specific address for you and see if it's permitted or not.
Okay, well, but even if it is permitted and if it's causing a problem, we,
Madam Vice Chair, we can work it out.
okay.
We can, and currently the procedure without the HO is those do go to city court.
Yeah, but we're sending them to the HO now.
Starting November 15th, we're sending them, yeah. I mean, well, they'll be, starting next Tuesday, we'll be notifying people, but the first hearing will be November 15th. So there is the option to take violations for permitted STVRs still to city court. I have no idea if that is happening.
I
Again,
don't
we have
think
less
that's
than
the
once a
intent of
month.
this body. I think everything related to short-term vacation rental is supposed to go to HO.
I do agree with that. They have the flexibility to do that. I'm simply stating they have another way to deal with it if it's urgent. But again, we had less than one complaint per month last year, so I'm unaware of an uptick. I will get with you and get the specific address, and we'll work on that
Okay.
after this meeting, if
Okay.
that's acceptable.
Sure.
At this time, I'd like to give you a few moments. I introduced most of you to Jim, for those of you who hadn't met him before. Darren called him Chick-fil-A because I called him the franchise before this meeting. It's like we were setting up a restaurant from scratch, and then a franchise walked in with everything kind of already figured out from his work with Collegedale, Red Bank, and Saudi Daisy. And Jim can answer the questions about the state requirements about notification and how we process that paperwork. So I'd like to turn it over to Jim Exum.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. You know, I hope the 268 number, I hope it falls dramatically once people start getting letters from my office. I hope we're not hearing 30 a week, because generally in my experience, when the letters go out, 70 to 75% of those cases resolve themselves. People go ahead and fix the violation, and that's the intent of the statute, is to encourage compliance, not penalizing folks. So I'm hopeful that when letters start going out, we will start seeing compliance, and that number starts dropping very quickly. So does anybody have any questions specifically, though, about the process? I know,
I do.
go ahead.
Okay, so I hope also that people will choose to come into compliance with our regulations. But the way that this is set up, 30 go out on the day, and the first hearing happens in November. Walk us through, if you will, please, Jim, what that's gonna sound like from your desk in that conversation. Because what I've witnessed in city court with a violation like this would be, well, I don't see that this is up anymore, or we've changed it to 30-day rental. Do right, fly straight, and we'll see you in 30 days, or we'll wait for another complaint. And that's what this body and what our constituents are woefully exhausted with. Walk me through your legal conversations with violators.
Sure. So we've seen this before. We see these violations, and we see people game the system, I think is what you're talking about. So a lot of the enforcement aspect of it from your old city officials, they have to re-inspect at some point, and they have to go back out and make sure that the actual violation has been cured. So once they come to see me and I put down the $500 a day fine, if it's commercial, which STVRs would be, that starts accruing right then. And then you have to give between 7 days and I believe it's 90 days to correct it. Obviously with these, we're probably gonna stick more to the 7 days. Let's get this thing fixed, let's get this thing done. And they will be admonished by me to please, make sure that they are in compliance. But a lot of the enforcement or re-inspection is gonna fall on city codes. Now, I'm not telling you we're not gonna see the same people coming back. You're gonna see the same people coming back, sometimes. In Red Bank, I see the same offenders a couple of times. It's usually for different things. But I'm hopeful that once they come before this body and they're being fined $500 a day, and that's actually being enforced, they get the message and they don't want to come back.
So if if someone is operating an unpermitted short-term vacation rental today and they're in tranche number 7 and they don't get their letter until January, but they've been violating since who knows how long, there, I would think that by law, they would have the same conversation as somebody that gets their letter in November.
Absolutely.
How are we choosing those, Chris? Is it a random
I
process?
believe it's random.
Okay, that's good.
It's
So
not
that, I
like
mean,
zip
so
code or
that's,
anything,
it's,
random.
okay, that's good.
And every case is gonna be handled differently, so I don't want I'm not saying, you know, we're probably gonna hew close to 7 days. You never know what somebody's gonna come in and tell you. I mean, somebody could have, and probably not under these terms, but, you know, with property maintenance issues that we will eventually get to with, you know, chip paint, stuff like that, everybody's got a story to tell. So every story is gonna be considered independently to make sure that we are doing just by them. But for these right now that are unpermitted, we're gonna take a pretty hard line on them right out of the gate.
So you're gonna look at their listings online and say, wow, you have 35 reviews. Doesn't seem like you haven't been operating.
Well, I'm hoping that the DCR will present all that to me, that they will have that accumulated, so I can
Okay.
actually take a look at that.
All right.
I'm not a judge, but I have to consider the evidence that's presented before me, so I can't go and look at these things
So
independently.
our staff has to present to you. Got it. Okay.
And there have been multiple meetings about what Jim expects for a complete case file
Terrific.
to be. And Mike had those meetings as well.
Yeah.
So everyone's on the same page about it, and our staff has been trained accordingly.
All right, Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim, a couple quick questions. So the $500 a day, is that amenable by, or do you have the flexibility to change that, or is that an automatic fine? There is no going around that.
It is up to 500.
Up to 500 a day, okay.
I can tell you, I have never found anything less than 500.
Good answer.
So we have seen, and to Councilwoman Hills,
Yeah, good.
well, you're hitting on some cylinders now, because we have seen, and Councilwoman Hill is right, enforcement is a very, in some cases, a little laughable item. It really is, and I think, and I tell you why, because our constituents who do obey the law, who do play by the rules, rightly so, get ticked off. Because they see people who don't. And enforcement sometimes is just, it doesn't exist. I think it's okay to have some rules. I think it's okay to enforce them. And it sounds like, I mean, you have experience obviously doing this, you have a great reputation. That will get some attention.
I hope so. I hope the combination of letters and I hope the combination of news media covering this will get out and people start talking to one another and realizing they do not want to have to burn an afternoon and come down and deal with this.
And let me add on that Dr. Burrs and I both added items that I think our constituents across this city would like to see addressed, and that is noise, and that is also litter, which has just gotten completely out of hand. I mean, the county's addressing it now, in different avenues, and I can't wait to see that implemented, and I can't wait for the news media to report that we're getting serious about littering too, because I think that will get the attention and we'll start having a little cleaner place to live too. So, are you ready for this, Jim? That's my biggest question for you.
Absolutely. I'm ready to get going. My
Okay.
staff is, I think my staff will be relieved if they don't have to do all this eventually, but they're ready to go. We've got, our documents are fill-in documents at this point, so we can, as soon as we get the citations, we can turn them around very quickly and get them out.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Ledford. And I had Councilman Hester and
Yeah, okay.
Councilman Burrs.
Chris, bring me to a better understand this as far as the code enforcement, there's since both AHO's administrative staff are reviewing ordinance for STRs, noise and litter on an ongoing basis. Is it limit only to noise and litter?
Only at the moment. Sir, if you have another issue you'd like us to tackle, we'll add it to that list. All you have to do is say the word.
Cars in the yard,
Cars in the yard.
I'll add it.
Code violation.
code violation.
Councilwoman Burrs.
So, just to clarify, Jim, you did say these are all commercial ventures.
Yes, if it is being used as a rental property, it is by definition a commercial.
Okay.
And this council deemed that as well.
Yes. I
After
just,
much conversation.
yeah, I just
Just a year.
wanted that on the record. I do have one follow-up, and this is, I guess, to council. I think we need to be, I don't remember, and I should, what was the budget item for the AHO?
72, something?
I just don't remember, but I think we should be talking about, well, there's two things. The one that Jenny brought up about the use of the money, because it's limited.
Yes, ma'am.
I really think we should be talking about, because of the backlog, we need to do more than one afternoon a week. And I would love to see what those figures would be, because we're, as Councilman Ledford said, we got a big backlog.
We will see, I mean, the once per week and the 30 cases per week was what we determined probably our capacity was, but I will go back and see.
Money-wise, or, that's what I'm asking.
Not money-wise, but the people are finite too, and.
The people they can
capacity,
serve.
both with Jim and his staff, but we can see if we can increase that. We'll go back to the drawing board on that.
So for each case that I hear, I have to draw an order.
Oh, I know.
And if we actually have a full-out hearing, it's gonna be a lengthy order. So 30 seemed like a good, I hope it's not 30, I hope it's closer to 15. But I think that's what I could do in a week.
I'm just saying what we as a council ought to be looking at is, I can see this being at least 2 days a week, looking at it, because we're committed to cleaning up our city. I mean, I've heard it over and over again, whether it's garbage, no matter what it is, we're committed to cleaning up our city, and this has been the hardest thing in the world to get into place, for nobody's fault, just stuff. And I would like, Madam Chair, for us to really keep this to the fore. And I would like to know, if we did this 2 days a week, what does it cost? What are we asking for?
So right now, to answer your question, Councilwoman, irrespective of the city staff and the land development office who are assigned to this, our annual budget is $40,000. And the total, I believe, was $225, including our enforcement staff in the LDO. And we're not actually fully staffed with the enforcement staff, so I believe there's probably a little bit of room there. And some of the staff is new, so they weren't here for the whole year, et cetera. There's a little bit of room to increase or decrease those two numbers. But 40,000 is the answer for outside. That would include the AHOs at an hourly rate and some hours of Chambliss administrative staff at an hourly rate.
And
Obviously a lower
so when
rate.
Mike is back, able to work, if we doubled it, yeah, that's what I would like us to look at. I'm saying this to my colleagues. There is money available. We can find it for everything else in the city, and you're talking about, say, $40,000 more. And that's certainly money well spent, and I would like us to look at it to make sure that we keep our commitment to our constituents about our city clean, people following the law. I just think, I can't tell you right now, that is so important. Thank you.
Councilwoman, Laurel, followed by Phil.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, the part about keeping the city clean, my district, I have reached out. It's been probably 3 weeks or a month now in reference to overgrowth on several properties that my constituents have called on. And I did ask for assistance with those, and I have yet to have those issues addressed. It was brought to my attention again on Monday night at the neighborhood meeting association meeting. The follow-up, the follow-through, I mean, I don't understand why we can't get them taken care of. Why do they have to wait a month, 3 weeks to a month, in order to get anything done? You can send me a letter to my personal house because my grass was 4 inches too high and tell me I need to cut it, or I'm going to be fine. But, you know, I cut my grass. I have a yard guy that cuts my grass. But because of the rain, he didn't get there in time enough to get it cut. So my thing, we have bushes. I went out to several of these sites. It's ridiculous. It's unsafe, it's unkept, and I'm not sure. Another thing, Madam Chair, if I might bring up, this one might help us here. If my council family, if we could have a discussion about a chief of staff for council. Has that ever been brought up? Have we ever had that? We need someone that can actually be a go-between for us to help us in situations, because all of it in the length of time that it's taken to get things taken care of is unexcusable. It's ridiculous. It should not happen. I get tired, and I know my constituents get tired of them calling me, and they having to call me when I've already spoke to someone in reference to it and that these things need to be done. So help me with that, if it's possible, if we as a family can have that discussion and put some things in place for this. Now, if that means revisiting the budget, then let's do that.
So we are still in the AHO conversation, so we wanted to add that to another,
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry. I throwed it in there because of the,
enforcement.
yeah, I got on my soapbox. And
That's all right. Yeah.
everything I said in caps, but I am not yelling at you.
I know.
Thank
I
you.
know you love me. So that's, oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Ledford?
Madam Chair, thank you. If I could circle back around a question for Jim, and that is, Jim, in the 268 unpermitted STVRs we have today, so as I love to track this around the country, and just recently, the city of New York, which I spent a weekend here recently, has just literally abolished short-term vacation rentals, non-owner occupied. You can only do one now if you live or stay in the same facility. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating, that the city of New York has done that. So, Chris, you have alluded to in the past or recently that STVR applications are down. We expected a flood after the moratorium had extended. We didn't see that flood. Do you think, and this joint question, you guys can put your heads together real quick, do you think that 268 is kind of a cap? There's the origin of my question, and that we will be kind of going from there, working down into a pool that is manageable, so to speak, once the word gets out.
Councilman, there's no question that the demand for STVRs, both in Chattanooga and nationwide, is dropping. It's pretty clearly a function of the market that perhaps some were overbuilt, and there was a word that you can get rich by opening a bunch of STVRs.
Oh,
A
yes.
bunch of other people had the same idea, and they opened at the same time. If you look at those 268, the vast majority of those are in R1 zones, and they are in, and most of them are in either District 2 or 7, in an area where R1 used to allow them, or they're in District 8 outside of the form-based code. They tend to be more urban core centric for the ones that are not permitted but are operating, but they were not permitted before the moratorium, so they could have been in compliance and could be grandfathered in, but they never were permitted, so they are not grandfathered in.
Right.
And actually, I do think 2 has the most of the unpermitted ones. But 7 is kind of, your question about, or your statement about New York, I would defer to Phil, but obviously New York and Tennessee have different state laws, and other cities in Tennessee, Hendersonville to name one, have tried to go that far and have been rebuffed by the court system. So I think that we would be in a legally dubious position if we did that.
Oh, no, not a suggestion, it was observation.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry, it was an observation, trying to assess whether or not this 268, once we get it down, do we get it down to a manageable number because of supply and demand, one, and just from what I'm seeing around the country.
And clearly, I'll say again, the demand has dropped. And if you look at these sites like I do from time to time you'll see the average rent for the night has also dropped, which is an indication of more competition and more supply and less demand. We do have, this morning I got updated numbers on how many applications we have received since the moratorium expired. It's now up to 269. Of those, 13 have been denied because they didn't meet the requirements. 201 have been issued.
That's a lot.
And 55 are still in the review pipeline.
So how many do we have now? If 201 have been issued since we,
I should have anticipated that question. I can give you, Councilwoman, a rough estimate of 600 plus permitted. 6 to 650. I can get a more specific number. We've had some that have dropped off the list that are no longer permitted, but it's about 6 to 650.
Which is what, point something percent of our total housing stock, am I correct? Some in that number? Less than 1%
I
still?
don't know for sure, so I don't want to commit to that,
Yeah.
especially with.
Does that sound familiar, though?
It sounds reasonably close, yeah.
All right, council, well, it's 3:08, I know we have a 3:30, so were there any final questions for Jim or for Chris? I'm assuming the presentation over.
It is, ma'am.
Okay. Additional question. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Phil, I'm so sorry.
Attorney Exum, at least on our code, may be a little bit different than some of the provisions of the general state law. So you're enforcing that involving 4 other cities right now, the general state law for administrative hearing officers?
Red Bank, Collegedale, and Cy Daisy, they have all adopted their own ordinance. And
Okay.
It closely mirrors state law.
Yes, close, and that's what Chattanooga did in connection with this. And just for the council's involvement here, if you've got 268 STVR violations that are pending, there are notice requirements of at least 7 business days that people have to get if there is a violation. You have to send that out on the front end, so that's administrative cost, correct? And then you also have to develop a findings of fact and conclusions of law in each one of those cases here, and then issue that to the people that are in violation at the same time if there is any fine that is admitted to those folks. And then if there's a final order that goes down in connection with that case, they're supposed to be paying that in at that point in time whenever that occurs. So there's got to be some accounting for the money that is paid. And then it also allows for judicial review of that may go to a chancery court beyond that. Is that correct in your understanding?
Yeah, they have 60 days from the receipt of my order to appeal to Chancery if they so choose.
Okay, so that does require administrative acts on your behalf on here to be able to resolve those issues, and
Yeah.
we'll deal with the costs.
So after the initial hearing on November 15th, I have 7 business days to get my order out. And
Yes.
that's where the time crunch comes, but we will get those out. I've never missed that deadline yet, but we will get those out and be ready for the next group the week after Thanksgiving.
All right, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So thank you, Chris, for the presentation. Madam Chair. All right, and moving on down on our agenda, real quickly, National Night Out, it's October the 10th. I know everybody loves their communities and neighborhoods, and so I wanted to push that meeting, make our meeting earlier that day. So typically, of course, agenda starts at 3:30. Is 1 o'clock good with everybody?
What's the date, Madam Chair?
Tuesday,
October
October the 10th, yeah, 1 o'clock and 4 p.m.
I will be out of town that day, so
Yes.
I'll vote.
So 1 and 4. Okay, everybody got it down? All righty. Okay, so that's that. If you would take a look at the rest of the agenda, we have economic development and equity reports today, as well as Parks and Public Works. Affordable Housing Committee work session is October the 3rd. Let's see what else. And the rest we will cover today in the agenda. Make sure you look at your current vacancies for your board appointments. And that's it. Any comments or questions? I do have Councilwoman Dole down for our October 17th strategic planning, or either the first one in November to talk about a chief of staff or some additional support, legislative support for council.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And also to do the follow-up with, as far as the AHO with Chris, to get the court schedule, the budget to add the additional days, and also to add scope of work for cars and yards, as well as possibly overgrowth, and if there's any others, just feel free to send them. All right, that's it. All right, that's
Thank you.
it. We are adjourned to Saturday. Oh, I'm so sorry, yes. Yes, we're adjourned, but you can go ahead and say what you want to say.